Hello and welcome to this live reactive. The news has just broken. Cadillac Formula One team have announced their lineup for next season. Drumroll please. It's Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez who have signed for our 11th team and will be returning to the grid for 2026. Now, Bottas is a 10-time Grand Prix winner across 12 seasons. Perez has 6 victories to his name across 14 seasons. And this, a move that has been hotly rumoured for weeks now, is one very much based on the veteran driver's enormous wealth of experience, knowledge and proven speed. There is no doubt about it. Formula One is back. It's back with a bang. The summer break is well and truly over. Lawrence Barretto and James Hinchcliffe are here with me to digest it all. Lawrence, thanks for joining me. James Hinchcliffe, thanks for waking up for this. Of course, you're the other side of the pond, so I know we've got you out of bed early. I hope you've got a coffee to get into grips with everything that's been going on this morning. How are we doing? And your reaction, please, to the news.
Yeah, doing really good. Thanks, Laura. Sorry, Hinch, but yeah, it's great to come back with a big news story. I know it's probably the worst kept secret maybe in Formula One, that it was going to be these two. I think we've talked about it for a few months now, but I think it's good to get it out in the open because Cadillac know they've got a job to do to get on the grid in time for next year, and the sooner that they could get their drivers signed, sealed and delivered means the sooner they will ideally get to work with them, though they're still working through that with Mercedes on Bottas's side, so they can crack on and get prepared for next season.
James?
Yeah, I mean, I think to Lawrence's point, not a huge surprise. I know that they were talking to a lot of different drivers, and it really seems like they did their due diligence in trying to figure out who they wanted in these 2 seats. But ultimately, what they've done is relied on experience, which makes a lot of sense for a lot of reasons. And also, you've got 2 drivers that have a pretty big built-in fan base, right? I mean, Checo, probably the largest individual fan base of any driver on the grid. Valtteri has grown in leaps and bounds as a personality since leaving Mercedes as a race driver, with his stint at Sauber. And there's a lot of people that are very excited to see both these drivers back on the grid. So you've got, I think from a performance standpoint, a couple great selections, but then also whether it's commercially, just from a fan base standpoint, this is going to be something that goes over very well with a lot of people.
We've got a Mexican member of the team who works as a floor producer with us. And if her WhatsApps are anything to go by, I think the people of Mexico will be absolutely delighted with the news that Sergio Perez is returning to the grid. Hinch, I'll come on to you because you've just been on holiday with Dan Tauris, who's a key player in the Cadillac team. So I'm wondering how long you've had this information. Lawrence, though, how has this unfolded during the summer weeks? What does the timeline look like for these key decisions to be made and for them to both be announced on the same day as well?
Well, I think the best way to describe Cadillac's process here is thorough. I think they spoke to upwards of 15 drivers, whether or not that was someone that Loudon liked the look of, that Dan Tauris liked the look of, that Mark Royce, the GM president, did, or drivers who called up Loudon and threw their hat into the ring. There was a lot of interest in both of these seats because obviously seats on the Formula One grid are few and far between, and most of them had already been snapped up for 2026. So Cadillac have really taken their time to work out exactly what they wanted to do with the 2 drivers in their car, whether they wanted to go for experience, whether they wanted to split it like Audi are doing next year and go in one experience and one youthful driver in Nico Hülkenberg and Gabriel Bortoleto, or whether they even wanted to throw an American driver into the mix. And I think that's why it's taken a little bit of time for them to kind of really zero in on what they were going to do. Across kind of the July time, I know that they talked to a lot of young drivers like Fred Vesti, Mick Schumacher, Felipe Drugovich, kind of just weighing up whether or not it was good to have a young driver on one side of the car. But when they really pressure tested, as Dan Tauris said, their driver list, they realized that it was 2 experienced drivers that they needed. So they had messed around with a couple of pairings. Underside, they had 4 different pairings with 4 drivers and working out how that would kind of work out. And they just decided that experience is what they needed because they need to hit the ground running essentially next year. And Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez are the most experienced drivers available out there. You rattled off some of their stats, Laura. To have 2 drivers with more than 500 Grand Prix under their belt is immense, but also to have 2 drivers who have got such a breadth of experience. Sergio Perez has had the tough times at Red Bull and obviously the successful times when he contributed to that Constructors' Championship in 23. But he's also had those challenging times through Force India and Racing Point when the team almost folded and went into administration. How he knows how to kind of bring a team forward to galvanize a team. And with Bottas, he had immense success at Mercedes, but then came through with Williams, and there's obviously had a tougher time with Sauber, and so knows how to really grind as well. So actually the personalities that they've got, as well as the experience, will, I think, really help this team kind of hit the ground running like they want to do next year. And that's why over the course of, I think, a few weeks over last month, they kind of came to the arrangement pretty quickly once they zeroed in on the fact that they wanted those two. And then they were convinced, having interviewed essentially both Valtteri and Sergio, that they were the two drivers that were kind of worthy enough for Cadillac, as well as the other way around.
I'm fascinated about the dynamic between the two of them working together. We'll come on to that in a little while, but you mentioned there over 500 Grand Prix start, 527, 16 wins between them, and 3,435 points. You can see there more stats on the screen of just how experienced these two drivers really are. Now, Lawrence, in Silverstone, I asked you to nail your colours to the mast and say who you thought the Cadillac drivers were going to be, and you named these two. Fair play, respect where Thanks. It's due, as ever. You're right on the money. But you're saying that even at this point, Cadillac was still stress testing younger drivers. Hinch, you've just been on a boat for a week with Dan Tauris. When did you find out about this? How much have you heard from behind the scenes?
Look, Dan's a professional. You know, he keeps business and pleasure separate. I like Lawrence, you know, we had our theories, we had our ideas, we had our opinions, as so many people in the paddock did, but ultimately, you know, I think he nailed it. You know, I do think they were very thorough in their kind of process of picking these two drivers, and ultimately experience wins out. And again, I think it's for a lot of reasons. You have a team that's brand new in so many capacities. I think the more experience you can pump into that team in every position, the better off that they're going to be as they tackle this 2026 season. So you had a very, I think, unique situation where you had two drivers with that amount of experience available, each only 1 year out of the seat. I mean, that's not a very typical situation. So in a lot of ways, I think they were kind of lucky that both Checo and Valtteri were available, were eager, and I think they both have unfinished business in F1. You know, there is, if you're privileged enough to have the opportunity to be a professional racing driver, the ultimate privilege you can have in that position is deciding when you stop racing. Most drivers' careers are ended for them. And, you know, Checo was dropped in the middle of a contract. Valtteri was very vocal about wanting to continue with Sauber through the Audi transition. Neither of these drivers were done with F1. And I think both of them have this hunger and this desire to come back, which, when coupled with that experience, is what really pushed the scales in their favor. They didn't want drivers that were just coming back to cruise and collect. They wanted two hungry drivers that were there with something to prove that could push this team forward. And ultimately, that's what they got.
Yeah, and I think to that point,
Sorry, go ahead,
I was going to say, just to that point, Dan Tauris was saying when he spoke to the media ahead of the announcement under embargoes that they spent a lot of time talking to Checo to convince themselves that Checo was the right one for them, that he had that hunger, because obviously he spent this time off the grid. While Valtteri's been with Mercedes, he's done the reserve role. He's been, you know, talking explicitly every race weekend that he wants to come back. Sergio's been with his family, kind of out of the picture, and maybe it was less clear where he was, where his mind was. You know, he's been training hard, and I think once the decision was made in his own head that he wanted to come back, he knew that he had what it took to deliver on that unfinished business that Hinch mentioned. But he had to go into that interview, he had to sit into that room, and he had to impress upon senior management across General Motors and Cadillac and Graham Loudon, who's the team principal, that is the case, you know, and apparently Dan was saying he passed with flying colours because they really felt like they got so much from the way that Checo was so expressive and passionate about coming back. And I think the way that both his time in Formula One and Valtteri's ended, they really want to end their career on their own terms, like Hinch was saying. And I think for them, that's a real motivation for them. That was a real motivation for them to make sure they're training really hard. For Valtteri, it was the motivation to embed himself in all of those engineering meetings. And as boring as it is to be a reserve driver, and reserve drivers will tell you this, he was okay to do that this year because he knew it gave him the opportunity to see what development the Mercedes were doing with the 2026 car, which will be crucial for Cadillac. It gave him the opportunity to put himself in the shop window. So I think the way that, Cadillac have gone about stress testing the drivers as well has been impressive. And the other thing that I found interesting that Dan said was they spent a lot of time talking to Red Bull personnel. So they went in, spoke to engineers, senior management there, to get their view of Sergio Perez, because obviously a lot had been said when he left the team about, how they maybe didn't rate him. But actually, I think the reality is they rated him quite highly. And it was more just that the relationship wasn't going so well towards the end because the performance wasn't there. So I think that I'm going to say thorough again, just everything they put in to kind of choosing these drivers, even if I think Sergio and Valtteri were probably their number 1 and 2 very early on, that didn't mean they didn't want to do their due diligence to make sure they were the right 2.
Yeah, great stuff. It's so clear, isn't it, that there's been so much work behind the scenes and that they're not here to make a splash with big names. They're making sure, yes, they've got these big names, but these big names want to drive Cadillac in the best position and are ready for the job as well. You look back actually to, I think it was post-Canada, around the sort of 9 weeks ago or so, Bottas put out that reel, didn't he? So while Perez may have been working quite quietly behind the scenes at getting this seat, Bottas did the reel on Instagram showing the Cadillac seat, saying that would be nice. I'm guessing at that point, nothing was quite set in stone, and that's just Valtteri Bottas doing Valtteri Bottas things. And we're hoping, I guess, that Cadillac will allow him to continue to develop and for us to see this very rich personality that's come out over the last couple of years.
Well, they take very different approaches, don't they, to social media, I think. Well, I think Valtteri really thrown himself into it, even more so this year as a reserve driver, whereas Sergio has really taken himself off the map, for the whole time that he's been out. He's done a couple of live events locally within Mexico, where something little slipped out. I remember I did an interview with him a few months ago now where he was kind of weighing up what he wanted to do, but the hunger was there. I knew that he wanted to return. It was just kind of getting the right project. So I think that what Cadillac are getting are the racing drivers with that experience. To Hinch's point earlier, it's the commercial benefits that they both bring, but actually they're very likable people, who people are going to continue to support, and they'll draw new fans. And I think you can see even just from their launch video today when they announced Valtteri and Sergio with Keanu Reeves. I think it just shows you that Cadillac are going to want to do something different, and I think they're going to want the personalities to be at the forefront of the project that they're bringing in. And so I think in Valtteri and Sergio, they've got very different, but they've got big personalities.
Yeah, I want to come on to the dynamic between them soon. I'm just going to read the Graham Loudon quote that is in the release that came out around 12:30 UK time today. Graham Loudon said, "This is a very bold statement of intent. They've seen it all. They know what it takes to succeed. But more importantly, they understand what it means to help build a team. Their leadership feedback, race-hardened instincts, and of course their speed will be invaluable as we bring this team to life." A big thank you to the team at Mercedes for their cooperation and understanding. That, of course, is in getting Bottas across from that reserve driver role into development now for Cadillac for 2026. Lawrence, you sat down with other key personnel as well, including Dan, who we've mentioned. What else sort of came out to you yesterday? What else stood out in your mind?
Yeah, so it also included the General Motors president, Mark Royce. And what really came out is I think they are very aware of the huge task ahead of them, which is to get a racing car on the Formula One grid from a standing start. And, we're in the paddock, obviously, most weekends, Laura Hinch, and we know what a challenge it is for the current teams to get a new car ready for the new regulations for 2026. So for General Motors to be starting from scratch with this Cadillac brand, they know what a challenge it is. So I think to bring the likes of Valtteri and Sergio on and leverage that experience, Red Bull, Mercedes, they've won all the championships for the last decade. So to have that kind of intel to be able to call upon from both Checo and Valtteri will be crucial. They talked a lot about how in all of the racing series that they've been involved in, how the driver can really have a key role in that feedback, the way that they talk to the team, kind of articulate what they need with the racing car, how crucial that is. And I think in those two drivers, Sergio, particularly with, say, his tyre management, Valtteri just in the way that he articulates things, to a team, those kind of character traits are going to be crucial. And I think that's what they were really aiming to hit home yesterday is, while it was really cool that there were so many young, talented drivers available, and, there's no, it's no bad thing that they just haven't got the experience, but they've gone for the veterans, I guess, because they want that experience. They want to plug them in and get them going. And I think we talk a lot about in Formula One about driver impact, and even though Valtteri's been on the sidelines as a reserve driver, he can still play a role in car development, and so I think that it's really trying to prove that when you have that experience, it can have a direct impact on car development.
Hinch, I'm going to come to you now. Take us inside the garage, inside the helmet, inside a team dynamic where you have these two experienced drivers and you have a team who are ambitious but new in their rookie year in Formula One. We've talked a lot about why they've gone for experience, but what does that look like tangibly on the ground within the garage, that experience in feeding back to help Cadillac's development here?
Well, it's a really interesting situation because when you have a team being started from scratch, there is no culture yet, right? There is no history of process, of procedure, of protocol. All those things are being developed in real time at the moment. And it's not just drivers, obviously, that have input in that. You've got mechanics that have come from Formula One teams. You've got engineers that have come from other Formula One teams. So you kind of have this melting pot of concepts and philosophies from up and down the grid, all converging in one place with this blank canvas. And so one of the most important things that certainly has already started, but is going to be very important, as you go through the kind of the next 6 months, as we get, towards the start of the season next year, is what is that culture going to be? What is that environment going to be like? Which processes are we going to adopt from this team? Which, protocols do we like from over here? And really kind of identifying what Cadillac F1 is going to be like as a race team. And, the drivers, as Lawrence mentioned, I mean, they've been part of the two most dominant teams of the last decade. They've seen it happen from the top level. But that's not to say input from other parts of the team, other areas and levels of the org chart are not going to be just as instrumental in that. So right now, it's a very exciting time. Like I said, blank canvas, the sky's the limit. The opportunities are endless. You can clearly see Cadillac and TWG's and GM's commitment to what they're doing, which I think gives everybody involved in that program a lot of enthusiasm, a lot of excitement, a lot of hope. But ultimately, there's a ton of work and everybody's very, aware of just how big an undertaking this is. And it's, it's a long-term project. It's built for long-term success here. And the next little while is going to be a grind, but it's an exciting opportunity for everybody involved.
You mentioned the success they've had in two giants of the F1 world, in Red Bull and Mercedes. Within those teams, these two drivers ultimately were number two drivers to Max Verstappen, 4-time world champ, and Lewis Hamilton, 7-time world champ. They have been given equal status within Cadillac. That's been clear. They both signed multi-year deals. So there is a commitment here to both drivers. So how does this dynamic play out between them? We've seen the comparison of their stats. They both have 12 and 14 years experience. How does this play out between them? Because yes, on one hand, they're developing for Cadillac. They're hitting the ground running with the team. They're feeding back. They're creating that culture you mentioned, Hinch. But equally, your teammate's your biggest rival. They're going to want to beat each other. And this is a real test now of the two of them.
It is. It's probably a little bit more unique than the traditional driver pairing, in the sense of, your teammate's your biggest enemy, but in some cases, your biggest ally as well. These drivers right now not only have to perform on track and outperform each other, which is the kind of golden rule of every Formula One team, but because of the early nature of this program, I think what you can bring off track and how you can help the development of this team, outside of the race car is going to be equally as important. I think the driver that can, obviously they both need to get it done on track. They've both proven they can do that in the past. You kind of talked about that second driver status at other teams, though very true. Checo was a bit of a leader at Force India. Valtteri obviously stepped into that role at Sauber. So they've been the lead driver on teams as well. This is probably, to be fair, the first time in a long time, at least for both of them, that they've been on equal footing with the other driver. But like I was saying, we know they're both capable behind the wheel of a race car. I think the difference maker here is going to be which driver behind the scenes is helping develop not just the car, but also the team and all those procedures and all those processes like we were speaking about, because there's a lot to learn for this group. And so the one that can contribute the most, both on and off track, I think is going to have the edge.
Hinch, we mentioned, Lawrence, did you want to add to that? Sorry, go ahead.
Well, I was just quickly going to say, I think that if they were competing towards the front of the field next year, then I think it might be a little bit different. I think they would be ultra competitive, but I think the reality is they know that they're going to be coming in from the bottom up and fighting their way through. And I think we've tended to see that relationships tend to allow for, tend to be more amenable. They tend to get on much better because they know that for the greater good, if they work together, they can pull the team forward, and then things can get spicy, when they're fighting for honours to up the end. So I think both drivers actually will probably be a bit relieved that they're coming into this new project after a year out, knowing that actually it's tough for everybody to kind of get performance out of the car straight away. So they can kind of learn together. They kind of got that comfort blanket. And then to Hinch's point, behind the scenes, that's where the real battles will happen. If Valtteri ends up beating Checo in the first 5 races, then Checo goes on a run of 7 races. I don't ultimately think they're going to be that bothered unless Checo's getting podiums and Valtteri isn't. I think the difference will just be that they'll want to make sure that every race they go to, one of them's getting the most out of the car, so the car is progressing. So I think it'll be, to start with at least, it will be a bit of a different relationship. But I think both of them will want to assert authority, because even though they're going to only be, well, at the moment, as the terms of the contract, they've got until the end of 2027 at least, they're seeing this as a long-term project. They're only both mid-30s, both 35. They've got plenty of time to go. So I think that this is kind of a transitional year, word I know that people hate using, among teams in Formula One, but that's the reality of it. They'll just need to kind of get stuck in. But I think what they will want to assert their authority, one or the other. So watching that evolve towards the end of next year and beyond will be really interesting.
Yeah, great stuff. Hinch, I was going to ask you, Lawrence mentioned how hard Sergio Perez has been training because he'd set his sights on a return to the grid. What does that look like for a driver where you're not getting in a race car at full tilt for minutes, 2 hours every weekend, but you are having to keep that fitness somehow? You know that the likes of Valtteri Bottas is embedded within a Formula One team already, in the paddock all the time. How has Perez been trying to just make sure he is keeping up?
Well, look, every driver has their training schedule that you have while you're an active racing driver, right? Checo's worked with trainers for the last 20 years on this side of things. He knows what he has to do. He knows his body. He knows what level of fitness he needs to be at to be, a Grand Prix driver. Ultimately, though, it's so hard to replicate being in the race car. There's really nothing you can do in a gym that 100% replicates the forces, and everything that the body goes through inside a car. So whereas, Valtteri's been trackside, he's not been in the car a bunch. And so as long as Checo's been keeping up with the sort of training that he was doing as a full-time driver, if anything, he's got more time on his hands. He's not traveling to 24 races a year. He's not having to get over jet lag coming back from Australia, coming back from these different parts of the world. So a lot of times, when drivers take these years off, whether it's voluntary or not, it can be quite beneficial, because look, a year as a Formula One driver is a hard thing on the body. It's the travel, the forces that you subject yourself to. It's a lot. A year off can actually be quite good mentally, can be quite good physically. And so both these guys, not having the pressures, of being a full-time racing driver and having a little bit more free time to focus on things like their fitness and, mental acuity and things like that could be beneficial. So again, he's probably been just training the same way that he would have been had he been on the grid full time this year.
And as you mentioned, both have unfinished business, and what a privilege it is for any athlete to be able to come back and hopefully finish a career out on their own terms, building something that could have so much longevity within the sport in this 11th team in Cadillac. Now, they've not yet named a reserve driver, so the driver market rumbles on. We've had a number of younger drivers, as we mentioned earlier, who were stress tested through this recruitment process from Cadillac. we know that management had then plumped for experience, but you've got the likes of Mick Schumacher, Zhou, Colton Herta, Alex Dunn, Jack Crawford, Felipe Drugovich, who've all been linked to the team, Fred Vesti as well. Do we know, guys, who the front runner for a reserve driver may be and when we may expect to hear anything? Lawrence?
I'm not entirely sure who the front runner is, but what I would say is that I think this is an opportunity for them to begin two projects that they want to work on, which is they want Cadillac to be a brand that does bring youth through. So using some of the names that you've just mentioned, like the Mick Schumachers, the Felipe Drugoviches, the Fred Vesties as well. The idea of starting to bring them through in that role makes sense. But also going forward, they've said that they want to bring an American onto the grid. 2026 was too early. I think Dan Taris mentioned that Colton Herta doesn't have the super license points either. He was linked with the team. I think the ambition is to create an academy of sorts to try and bring an American through that can really make a splash when they make it into Formula One. So I think with that role and the development roles that they will add into the team, those will be the two key things that they'll want to do, because I think obviously Cadillac are here for the long term. They are here to win at some point within Formula One, and so they want to build a massive project, and that will involve bringing youth through and hopefully at some stage bringing an American through.
Hinch, any ideas or anyone you'd love to see in that seat?
Well, I mean, it's an interesting one. It's for some reason it's a lot harder to nail down what makes the most sense for the reserve driver role than seemingly it was for the two race driver roles. Lawrence and I nailed that one, but for some reason it's a little bit harder. For sure. I mean, you want someone young, you want someone hungry, you want someone eager. It's always good to let the two drivers in the main seats know that there's, a young and enthusiastic driver that's there and ready to pounce if they're not performing. Certainly they've not hidden the desire to eventually have an American driver in the car, but I was very happy to hear, Graham say way back when that performance is going to be, prioritized over nationality. This is the sport we're talking about, so it should be. But you do have, Jack Crawford, so that's certainly an interesting opportunity. A guy like Felipe Drugovich, he's already in a reserve driver role. I'm not sure it makes a lot of sense for him to switch to a different reserve driver role at this stage. That's a guy you kind of feel for. He's been sort of stuck in this purgatory for so long, wanting to get onto the grid, but not really having that opportunity. Guys like Vesti are very interesting, certainly. And I think ultimately Lawrence has a great point there. Is this team now, among the massive laundry list of things they need to do, one of them is really start establishing their own, driver academy or farm system, the way that you look at how, Ferrari brought Leclerc up, Red Bull brought Max up, Mercedes brought Kimi, and I mean, frankly, George as well up. These programs are so well developed now. That's another thing they're going to have to kind of play a little bit of catch up on. But with only 10 teams on the grid, soon to be 11, there's a lot of opportunity for young drivers to. A lot of young drivers are very excited. There's one more team to maybe be associated with, so that one's a little bit harder to nail down. But I'm excited to see who they pick.
Yeah, we'll keep an eye on it for sure. I'd actually throw Paul Aron's name into the mix as well. He's obviously been reserve driver for Alpine. He's hopped across to be reserve driver for Sauber. He's getting FP1s in. When I speak to him in the paddock, he's desperate for a drive. He just wants to get racing again. So it could be a project to get his teeth stuck into. Okay, we're going to move on to expectations then for the team. How challenging a year will this be for Cadillac? Lawrence, you mentioned you think it will be a case of starting from the bottom and working their way up. What expectations can we have of them in a year in which we are going to see a complete overhaul, both in chassis and engine regulations through 26? And could that prove a leveler, or is that going to make it even harder?
Yeah, and I wasn't trying to be disrespectful in saying they're going to have to work from the bottom up. I think it's just the reality that they accept, that they're coming into a sport where you've got powerhouses like Mercedes, Ferrari, Red Bull, McLaren, who've been competing at the sharp end for a long time now, and it's taken them years for McLaren to build this dynasty up. So I think they know the scale of the job. I think there will be some low-hanging fruit early doors because of these new regulations, like you're suggesting, Laura. I think there will be potential reliability issues. There will be a slightly mixed up pecking order, like we tend to see at every regulation change. We've seen new teams come in, like Haas, and they score on their debut. So it is not impossible that, they will come in and make a bit of a splash. I think, though, that what will take time for them to do is to adjust to the pace of Formula One, the development race that we have in Formula One, the logistics, the operational challenges that there are. Even just getting the pit stops right can make and break a race. So there are going to be a number of things. Communication, we see even with the big teams, can sometimes get a bit quirky. And Cadillac are coming in without any kind of background to that, within Formula One. So I think the scale of the task is huge, but there are opportunities within a regs change for them to make that splash, to have that great weekend that will kind of serve as motivation for them to keep on building. They've got a Ferrari power unit, which, if you talk to insiders in the sport, they'll tell you that it's most likely with Mercedes going to be one of the class leaders next year, just because of their experience, and history says that they have done a good job making that power unit. So if the power unit plays a bigger part early in the season, Cadillac could be onto a great thing. They've got two drivers who know how to finish races, who know how to stay out of trouble early doors. So a lot could go right for them really early on, but equally it could be a real challenge because, a lot of the big teams can just get it so right in a way that, Cadillac can't even believe to have that chance. So look, I'm excited to see them on the grid. I think the very fact that Sergio and Valtteri are joining this project, and I think Dan said he was humbled that they've decided to join. The very fact they're joining means that they must believe that the project can succeed, because they have pride at stake. They want to come back and prove that they have still got what it takes, and they want to end their chapters whenever that might be on the right foot. So I think that I'm excited to see what they can do. They're working at a pace at their 3 bases in Fishers, in North Carolina, and in Silverstone to kind of get this team up and running. And I think, remember when we last had some new teams coming into the sport, most recently with Haas. It's great. I think it's great to have like an unknown joining the grid.
Hinch, anything to add to that?
No, I think you kind of nailed it, Lawrence. I mean, the thing that I think is important is, and you mentioned it, that both these drivers are willing to sign up for this program. I know that they were talking to other teams as well. There were potentially other opportunities for these guys to get back onto a Formula One grid, but this was the project that excited them the most. So you've got to see the potential. You do know it's going to be an uphill battle. You are coming in completely green, with a completely new group of people. But I think a reg set coming in at the start of a new reg set's, I think, better than coming on the last year of a reg set, having to worry about catching up to these teams that have optimized these cars to the nth degree, while simultaneously trying to, build another car. They've been able to focus all their attention, all their focus, onto 2026. And they have brought in some experienced people who, are hopefully pushing them in the right direction. And you just don't know. You're not going to be surprised if they line up on the last row of the grid, but equally, you're not going to be surprised if they're on row 4. It's just how much of an unknown 2026 is going to be.
Oh, it makes it all the more exciting, doesn't it? And we've got 11 teams and 2 brilliant drivers returning. We'll take a look now, finally, at what this means for the rest of the driver market. Because with these 2 committing their future multi-year deals to Cadillac, that means this is how our driver lineup looks through 2026. We still have seats available. 1 at Alpine alongside Pierre Gasly. Both Mercedes seats still up for grabs. Red Bulls and both Racing Bulls seats as well. So where are we slotting drivers in here?
Well, I might take the easy ones first and go for Mercedes. And I think
sorry, Hitch.
Sorry, Hitch. George's contract up for renewal at the end of the year. I think as soon as it became clear that Max wasn't coming to Mercedes, it became very obvious that George was going to stay at Mercedes. The question is just the terms of the contracts. I would be very, very, very surprised if he's not in one of the seats. And I think when they brought Kimi through, the idea was it was supposed to be a long-term deal. So I can't see how that lineup won't won't say the same for next season.
And Hinch.
Hinch, I'll give you Alpine.
Okay, so okay, yeah, I'll do Alpine, and then we can trade notes on the Red Bull Racing Bulls scenario. You know what? I'm not sure I have a great answer for Alpine. I think you at this point look at maybe one of the other rookies that are sitting on the sidelines, one of these reserve drivers that we've talked about. You've got Paul Aaron in the system, who's keen to get back. I think there are some young talented drivers. It's nothing against Franco, it's nothing against Jack. They kind of both had a shot. You can argue all day long whether it was a fair shot or not. Unfortunately, fair is not the name of the game in motorsports. I would love to see Jack get enough races to even out the number that Franco got, to see if it would have gotten any better. Ultimately, that car has been so difficult to drive and lacking so much performance that a rookie driver, a young driver, was always going to struggle. So they've got a tough choice, honestly, because I don't think that this year's car gave either driver or any of the three drivers the real opportunity to show what their talent level is, what their capabilities are. I think obviously Pierre's a bit more of a known quantity, but going into 2026 with everything brand new, it's a bit of guesswork. So I'm not sure what they're going to do. I'm not sure what I would do if I was them, but I would probably lean towards giving one of these talented and promising up and comers a shot to jump in with a new car, not having to fight against drivers that already have 4 years driving the ground effects cars. They can kind of start from fresh and hopefully be a little bit more of a level playing field.
I think Alpine's a really fascinating project because obviously they're the bottom of the Constructors' Championship this year at the moment, and I think they're kind of resigned to the fact that that's where they're going to finish the year, just because their power deficit at some circuits is up to 0.4, and they can literally do nothing about that this year. Whereas next year they're swapping to Mercedes power, and if Mercedes is the best, or at least among the best, that might haul them back into a contention. They've had David Sanchez working at that team, really focused on 2026 for a long time. So it could be they are one of the teams that make a big step forward, and then suddenly that project becomes quite attractive. And you hinted at this earlier, Hinch, but that might be why I think Checo and Valtteri were considering that project, because of the potential there. But obviously there are a lot of unknowns, because I've just mentioned a couple of things there where we don't know how that's all going to pan out. The Mercedes power unit plugged into a new car and how the team used that, how David Sanchez's first big proper project really delivers. So I think there's a real good chance still that Franco will just keep that seat into next year. We've seen that Flavio's not afraid to just go race by race with a driver. So I guess what's the harm in giving him a couple of races at the start next year to give him another shot with this Mercedes powered car that should in theory be stronger, and seeing how he goes then, particularly if there isn't a load of drivers that you're out there that you're certain that you really want in that seat. You may as well stick maybe with a more known quantity.
Yeah, good points. The Red Bull and Racing Bulls, this conundrum that continues throughout Formula One. I think the general consensus and thoughts are that Liam Lawson won't be going back to that second Red Bull seat. That's very much what we're seeing and hearing. But who will be in that second Red Bull seat? Will Yuki Tsunoda get another year now that we have Laurent Mekies in that role? Somebody else being looked at?
I mean, do you put Hadjar in the second Red Bull, rotate him through just to see, either put Yuki back in the Racing Bulls and then, or not? I mean, it looks like Lindblad's probably going to be in the mix somewhere, right? They're unlikely to put him straight to the A squad. So let's say one of the two Racing Bull seats is going to Lindblad. Then it's Hadjar's, let's say you put Hadjar in the other Red Bull, then you've got Tsunoda and Lawson for the remaining Racing Bull seat. Which way do you go? Has Yuki had his time there? Has Lawson done enough to prove himself? It's an interesting situation. They've got more drivers than they have seats, which I guess is a good position to be in some respects. But yeah, I mean, the one thing I think is that we'll see Lindblad in some capacity, just because it seems like they're pretty hot and heavy on this kid.
I think this is the hardest time, as long as I've been covering Formula One, to understand what Red Bull are going to do here, because obviously we've had this change in management in Laurent Mekies, but we've also had like a greater control and influence from the Austrian part of the business. And we just don't know yet how they want to go about their driver selection. I think that's the reality of it. And I think you've brought Laurent in, and you kind of hinted at it there, Laura, that obviously he gets on well with Yuki, and that might suggest that maybe Yuki will get a bit longer in the car, maybe into next year, because he believes in him. Maybe he'll work better under Laurent. But then maybe Laurent might have seen something in the other young drivers that he's seen and promote them upwards. I think the one thing that I think we can be certain of is that I think that Laurent will make his decision based on driver talent, maybe not so much on results. So I think that he won't probably look at Yuki's results at Red Bull since he's joined and gone, well, this kid's got nothing. I think he'll understand that he's still got talent. I think the problem for him is whether if they do bring Lindblad up next season, they've got to drop one driver. And at the moment, it's not immediately clear which one that is. Liam, I think, scored in the last couple of races. Hadjar's been one of the standout, if not the standout. Had Gabriel Bortoleto not had such a good run recently, he's been a standout rookie. And obviously, Laurent will really back, as I understand it, Yuki's talent. So I think it's really tricky. I think maybe it feels like they're moving towards more stability. And so for that reason, I can see them just staying as they are, actually, and just leaving Yuki at Red Bull, Liam alongside Hadjar at Racing Bulls, and maybe giving Lindblad another year in F2. This is presuming he doesn't win the F2 championship. I think it becomes more complex if he wins the F2 championship. But I think then at least it kind of shows that maybe Red Bull's strategy overall has changed, that they are kind of given everyone a bit more time. To give Hadjar a second year at Racing Bulls makes so much sense, because I think they've seen how rushing a driver through maybe isn't the ideal scenario. I remember Franz Tost always used to say a young driver needs 3 years, which is what Yuki got in a junior team before he gets to step up. So it would make sense to maybe give him another year, maybe trust in Yuki and the good relationship that he's got for Max. And this is all based on the fact that they haven't got any like big drivers knocking on the door. And it seems like their commitment to bringing young drivers through, that Red Bull will remain this team that will bring talent through, not just go and buy the best driver. That kind of feels like where we're at the minute. But like I said right at the beginning, I'm probably sat on the fence firmly here. It just remains unclear yet what their overall strategy is, what their business mindset is, how long they're giving the team to get back to winning ways. And once we got some of those answers, it will be a bit clearer as to, well, actually, do they need to go and buy a driver, with talent, or are they prepared to take time to bring drivers through? So yeah, I've kind of danced around in a circle, but I think that's the challenge that they've got there.
Well, plenty of questions to ask the team when we head back after this summer break and heading off to Zandvoort tomorrow. This may be just an internet rumor, but we love an internet rumor. I'm seeing Alex Palou's name being linked to Red Bull. Hinch, do you know anything about that? Is that just based on his brilliant talent and the open seat for next year?
I heard the same thing for the first time this past weekend at the race in Milwaukee, which he once again performed admirably at. That's a tough one. I get there's a lot of obvious reasons why his name could be in the mix for a seat in F1. It seems for all the drivers that Red Bull already has access to, adding another one to the mix seems maybe counterintuitive. And I mean, you can't forget that he's in the middle of a legal battle over braking contracts, and he is contracted to Chip Ganassi Racing, so it would have to be pretty advantageous for CGR to let him go. So to me, that one is a great rumor, and I think a lot of people would love to see it for a lot of reasons. I don't know how much truth there is behind it, though.
We love a good rumor. They'll rumble on as we head into the second part of this F1 season. 10 races to go, not much in it in the championship battle. And we have 2 drivers confirmed on the grid for next year. Lawrence Hinch, thank you so much for joining me for this reactive. Lawrence, I'll be seeing you in Zandvoort. Can't wait.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to it. Let's get going again.
It looks very wet and windy, so pack your raincoat.
Perfect conditions for great racing at Zandvoort.
I know. I'm actually excited when I look at a wet, rainy forecast. And Hinch, I'll be seeing you in Baku. You're back for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix.
Yes, cannot wait. Azerbaijan through Abu Dhabi. Looking forward to it.
Oh, amazing. Brilliant to have you back. Thanks both so much. Thanks to all of you guys for joining us for this as well. Welcome back to the grid, Valtteri Bottas and Sergio Perez. For now, though, we'll see you all in Zandvoort. Bye for now.